All you jolly fellas, come listen to my song. It's all about the lumber boys and how they get along. They're a crowd of jolly good fellas as ever you may find. It's how they spend their winter months in hurling down the pine. At 4 o'clock each morning the bus begins to shout. Heave out my jolly teamsters, it's time to start the route. The teamsters they will all jump up in a most fretful way. Where is me boots, where is me pants, me socks has gone astray. At 6 o'clock it's breakfast and every man is out. For every man who is not sick will sure be on the route. There's sawyers and there's choppers to lay the timber low. There's swampers and there's loggers to drag it to and fro.
Is the sound all right? Okay. No? This darn thing. What?
My delegation would like to submit to the Assembly a very short resolution. When human personality will be regarded as greater concern than wealth or property or power, however great.
We built a country, east and west and north. We built it on an infrastructure that deliberately resisted the continental pressure of the United States. For 120 years we've done it. With one signature of a pen. You've reversed that.
And to feel like, as much as is possible in this kind of world, the master in his own house.
But in the background is a much wider and more suggestive question connected with the fact that Canada seems to have moved from a pre-national to a post-national phase of existence without ever having been a nation.
But listen, you kid, don't get caught in the Canadian syndrome, where if it's Canadian, it's got to be bad. We're the best. I've been telling you the best.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the 11th episode of the Red Ensign Special. This is continuing our series looking at the elements of the right who have made the argument that the pursuit of virtue and life beyond the end of this regime are deeply interconnected. I have with me a guest today, Alex Masters. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good evening, my time. I think it's afternoon, yours.
Yes, well, such is life in the old country, I suppose. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. That is the end of the Lumber Boys intro. Unfortunately, the Canadian Lumber Corps have decided that I'm inappropriately stealing their video footage. So I will have to have a new intro for this series. So you can all shed a tear of goodbye for the Lumberman intro. In another important note for the channel, good friend of the show, Erin O'Toole, former leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, has decided to betray the online right. So you guys all may remember how good we were to Erin O'Toole, giving him several hundred times the engagement that he otherwise would have as a former leader of the Conservative Party on Twitter, on YouTube. My good friend Cryptos even invited him repeatedly on his podcast, which for some reason he declined. I still can't figure it out. But unfortunately, it was all a ploy. Aaron went on to write a series of articles for the Globe and Mail and for his own Substack, which is funded by a think tank out of the conservative side of Canadian politics, all about the despondency dilemma among young men on the online right. So, I feel used and abused, but nevertheless, this is the unfortunate and, not unpredictable ending of the Erin O'Toole saga. So unfortunately, I do not think Erin O'Toole will be appearing on the Red Ensign podcast, though I know my audience was yearning for all of his deep intellectual insights. So, such is life. In related news, there's a very important article out this week from Compact Magazine, where it lays out in great detail what those of us who have serious experience in the employment market had known for quite some time that in the period between 2011 and 2025, the corporate oligarchy of the American empire did everything in its power, especially in prestige industries, to exclude young white men. This ran from academia to Hollywood to banking and finance to engineering, where every major corporation made extraordinary efforts and was extraordinarily successful at rather than altering the racial and gender balance of its staff by firing older white men that had been employed for a long time, by simply not hiring young white men for an extended period of time. Now, those who have followed my content for a long time will note that my advice to young men has repeatedly been predicated on the idea that the doors of the key institutions of the mainstream are locked to us. I repeatedly come back to these kinds of content, these kinds of articles, because they drop periodically, because the policies which the Compact Magazine article is referencing are not over. They continue to this day, and are likely to continue into the future. If you think that your son, maybe you're a young man yourself, is going to have success by going to an elite educational institution and then passing into the ruling class of the American empire via climbing the ladder at one of these large corporate entities, I'm afraid you're mistaken. I wish that was good advice to young men. Some noted Canadian nationalists repeat this advice over and over again, that you can't get yourself locked out of law and banking and all of these kinds of institutions of government. But I'm sorry to say that that's not. Young white men aren't locked out of these institutions because for lack of trying to climb up those ladders. And so the reason I offer the advice to be entrepreneurial, to operate as much as possible outside the status hierarchies that, end in places like New York and London, it is not just because I think it's important that we form elites which are bonded to our own people, but also because there are some pretty serious structural barriers to having success in that way. And so you should not set your son, you should not set yourself on a hierarchy that is where the deck is so absurdly stacked against you. So that's the kind of that's the news off the top. We have our good friend Mark Carney being written about in the Globe and Mail as one of the great nation builders of our time. So welcome to the end of year 2025. This will be the last stream before Christmas, and that's where we are. Alex, how is life in the Starmerreich?
On the other side of the pond, it's much the same, and it always amazes me that we all seem to be having roughly the same conversation at the same sort of time. The big thing that's really grabbing the headlines on this side of the pond, though, is that we're all off to the Eastern Front imminently. It seems that the last sort of throw of the dice is just to try and back the Ukraine up with ourselves, and it's really being thrown back in the elite's face. I'm trying to advocate that actually this isn't we're imminently about to be marched off to World War III, but actually the Ministry of Defence lobbying for more money. The NHS can always say, well, if you don't give us money, Granny dies, and the education can say, well, if you don't give us money, your children will be wastrels on the streets. But the mod, the defence always has a tougher time of trying to beg for more money off the Treasury. So the threat of World War III is really the only lever they've got to pull on that one. and yeah, we're also having very similar things with what is increasingly looking like a lost generation of millennials. I mean, I'm the peak millennial. I was born in 1992, right slap bang in the middle. So, you know, our formative years really were the credit crisis back in 07, 08. And then, so you get the doldrum years. We had a triple dip recession, so we didn't really come out of that until 2012. Some would say we've never really come out of it. And then, yeah, we got pounded with the DEI stuff. So there are a lot of men my age and younger who never had those opportunities. And you're quite right. You know, trying to go up there, I often say it's like trying to go up through a trap door and everybody above you has stood on it. It's really a waste of your time and effort and money. Increasingly, there's quite the controversy actually coming from the left, funnily enough, about student loans in this country, which de facto are a bonus 9% on your income tax. I don't know if you know how
it's interesting because in the UK, I don't know if this has happened yet in the UK. In Canada, from about 2016, 2017 onward, the entire university system was repurposed as a cash for visa scam. So the overwhelming majority of slots at Canadian higher education institutions go to foreign students, and they go to foreign students because they're legally allowed to pay or to charge them like 5 or 6 times what they charge domestic students. And as a consequence, the institutions in their, unending search for more money decided that what they would do is sell student visas in exchange for, tuition payments. But, fundamentally stop educating the next generation of high-skilled Canadians. Now, we have some of our own troubles with student loans. The student loan situation is quite a bit more punitive in Canada in terms of repayment than it is in the UK. If I recall from my employees in the UK, it's pretty. If you get a job and are in a position to repay, it's actually pretty generous. The way in which they deal with you, is that correct or not correct?
We've long liked to think of it as that. The only problem is that how our system basically works is you take out a loan from the government. Depending on your repayment strategy, it's something like RPI plus 3.5%. Which means for someone like me, you're paying sort of 7.5% interest on it a year.
Yeah.
And then they take out 9% of your post-tax pay above £26,000 a year, I think. But we've had the sort of 1-2 punch.
Well, 7.5% is not exactly generous, so that's fair enough.
So if you're on average wage in the country, which is about 39,000, you're effectively just paying the interest forever.
Yeah.
The limit on the loan is 40 years, and then it gets wiped. But of course, if you graduated at 22, that means it only gets wiped at 62, which is 3 years, before you're 65 and really looking to retire.
So they're not going to garnish your pension income, is what you're telling me.
No, absolutely not. And the minimum wage has been rising so fast that in April, when it rises again, if you are full-time minimum wage, you will be over the threshold to pay back your student loan.
Right. So that's quite different than the last time I hired someone who had a student loan in the UK was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And at that time, there were like an entry-level job in a decent entry-level job was not over the threshold for repayment. But what you're telling me now is not only is a decent entry-level job over the repayment threshold, pretty much any job is over the repayment threshold these days. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. And of course, if you're paying 9% of your income, if you went and got a degree and then worked minimum wage, you'll actually take home less than minimum wage.
Right, yeah.
So they've finally, the incentives have gone from perverse to actually broken.
Yes, okay. Yes, okay. And you're telling me that you're not excited for these people to go and stand in a trench and be drone striked by Vladimir Putin?
Yes, Chinese drones or Russian artillery. The choice is yours in the free West now.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we have some of this rhetoric as well, except in Canada, the theory is you got to go to the far north and defend Canada's Arctic sovereignty, which is a fine Canadian tradition to freeze your you know what off in the Northwest Territories for a couple of months a year as part of your training. But let's just say it's not an attractive prospect, even in peacetime, to join the Canadian forces for almost anyone. There's
No,
a,
it's
a
a little bit of its character building, but doing it as a job isn't great.
Yeah, there's a very specific profile that has always that has always joined the Canadian Armed Forces. Um, you know, in my family, 5 consecutive generations were officers in the Canadian military. Um, that tradition is now thoroughly broken, but it really is the same people, and it's very hard to convince people who did not participate in who don't have that kind of generational connection to it to go through. Maybe they've softened the training these days, I don't know, but certainly some of the people that I know who have gone through it, it's still, it's a lot more difficult than working as a grad student, let's put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I've known a fair number of people who've joined up, and I too am from a military family, and it really is a family business. But very, very few of the service families I know, the kids have gone in, and those that have sort of done 5 years to get a bit of basic training and a couple of qualifications under their belt, and then disappeared because they can get much better paying conditions elsewhere.
Yeah. Speaking of which, we're here to talk about, we're here not to talk about the general state of the West. We're here to talk about strategies for the future. Now, for those who have followed this channel for a long time or listened to my millennial appearance, you'll know that there are really 2 strategies that I highlight as important components of political action going forward in this country, but also in the UK, I would say more or less the same thing. And the first of these strategies we've spent a lot of time talking about on this channel, which is what I call the pressure group strategy. That is the strategy of applying pressure to the federal government or the provincial government to execute a policy preference which is urgent without the threat of replacing them as an elite class. So when I interviewed Daniel TRE as the head of the Dominion Society, this is the strategy that he is taking on, which is to all day, every day advocate for a specific policy, in his case, remigration, to set up detailed policy plans that could be adopted by a government inclined to take up that strategy, to run propaganda to try to manufacture consent for this strategy. And, if he's listening, he will be following my advice to point out to the elite class, the kind of neoliberal elite class that run Canada, that executing this strategy would fix a lot of the problems that threaten their sovereignty in the country. There was news this week out that the population of Canada has declined this year for the first time in quite a long time. There's something like 100,000 people who have net left Ontario as a consequence of a number of things, but partly as a consequence of the Carney government's changes to the TFW and student visa programs, especially the student visa programs, really in an effort to break up a competing node of power in the country. This is not remigration at the scale that Daniel TRE or myself would prefer, but it is a substantial change from the world of Justin Trudeau, where millions of people were being brought to Canada. Maybe not quite millions every year. Well over 1 million every year were being brought to Canada we're in a different world now. And an organization like the Dominion Society, if it's well organized, if it's good at manufacturing consent, if it's good at pointing out to those in power the benefits of their policy, may be able to periodically get the existing elite to move in that direction. That's one strategy for influencing politics. The other strategy for influencing politics involves being prepared to actually replace the elite. In other words, take the current elite class that occupies the positions of power in Canada and replace them with an alternate group of people bound together on alternate principles. We've just discussed the fact that the doors for a march through the institution in this country are locked extremely hard. I think that's probably true across the West, maybe a little bit less so in America, but certainly in the Anglosphere, the doors are locked extremely hard. And so the other strategy that I've discussed repeatedly is parallelism. Now, there's a lot of different ideas about what parallelism looks like. But one of the most important elements of parallelism is creating local nexuses of power. And so today we're going to talk about localism. We're going to talk about the moment in a country's history where power moves from the center to the periphery. And we're going to talk about practical steps forward to try to pursue that strategy, knowing, of course, that the strategy of parallelism and localism, instead of being a short-term strategy targeted at getting policy relief, is a very long-term strategy that is really thinking generationally and civilizationally. So, Alex, one of the things that you come back to over and over again across all the platforms on which you engage is the difference between talking about things and doing things. Do you want to kind of flesh out why you make this point over and over again and what you have in mind by it?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about doing stuff. Really, I think there's a very useful phrase, which is, it's not 2016 anymore, which I keep coming back to, and people keep wanting to have the discussion and they keep wanting to go over and over again. But things have moved forward in both of our countries. We've both had massive waves of immigration, which has completely changed the game in that. Both governments are in, shall we say, severe financial distress. I think mine much more than yours. It's come out today that Rachel Reeves's structural borrowing is now massive. It's annualized up to about £135 billion a year, including one of the worst October figures, I think they were, on record, not including COVID. So there's some severe structural problems with the way the elite holds their power together. The other big thing, of course, is that the internet is not real. The irony of coming on a podcast and saying we don't need any more podcasts. Actually, we don't need any more book reviews. I think in the sort of 10, 15 years that we've been doing this now collectively as an Anglosphere, we've hashed out all the arguments that kind of ever been had. We can come at them from different angles, and that's really very interesting, and it's good to listen to in the car on the way to work. But the work has got to move forward. And if we do genuinely believe, as we do, that this elite structure has an end date to it, and it is rapidly coming to the left on the timeline, we need to be taking steps to avoid it as it collapses and ultimately profit from it. And the only way we're going to do that is actually in the real world. In fact, I tweeted just today that I think the internet is probably the greatest weapon of mass distraction ever made, because there are entire ecosystems there, talking about going way back to the concept of the Motte and Bailey Castle, where it is just rings of defense. So, you know, they try and palm you off with video games, and then talking about video games, and then talking about how the video games industry is broken, and then talking about how that reflects into politics and all these sort of. But then if you become political, then you get into the political podcast circuit, or you can go down the political philosophy route, or you can go off, you know, rage baiting leftists or things like that. There is millions and millions of man hours of great Twitter content there. But at the end of the day, you're still sat there with the phone in your hand and nothing's actually moved forward. So what we need to be doing is taking all this expertise and all this political nous that we've been building over the last 10 years, and we need to take it off the internet and actually put it back into real life. I quite fortunately am quite heavily involved in a number of local things, which, you know, why I'm here talking to you now. I think there's a certain degree as well of people like to be on the internet because, one, it makes the problem far bigger than they can solve, and two, it makes it seem far worse than it is. Actually, you can just sort of sit there and go, oh well, it's over, and this is all far too big for me. So what can I do? And actually, you need to go outside and realize that there's one, you know, a lot of good still left in the world, and there's a lot of good people doing good things who don't have a Twitter profile or a particular presence online, and two, that doing stuff is hard, actually, and even doing the bare minimum is a lot of work and a lot of pain and a lot of effort and a lot of sleepless nights and empty bank accounts, but it's got to be done. And there's no other way to do it. You know, the country is a real thing. Its problems are real, and they're going to get solved in the real world by real people. And so long as you're an avatar on Twitter, that's not helping.
So there's a whole series of layers to things that you've said there that I want to open up for a minute. So one of the things that you've said there is that there are real material problems that can and should be pursued towards solutions right now that you can pursue locally. Do you want to kind of identify a series of these problems that are vulnerable to attack in your mind?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with this elite that you find is they're sort of existing off in a hyper reality, which I know Sargon's been talking about recently. But what that actually means is that the fundamentals underneath it are creaking. And I'm talking about energy, transport, infrastructure. I'm talking about basic competencies, and the big word which I'm probably going to come back to again and again this stream, which is capability, which is actually the capability to do stuff. One of the big things that we're talking about with the MOD problem in this country and rearmament is we can't actually do stuff. There seems to be a dawning realization that you can't craft GDP into tanks. So we don't mine coal or iron or make steel. There's no industry for this sort of things. There's no physical stuff. They're trying to compensate by that by making everything electric, and they've got nowhere near enough either infrastructure or generation capacity. So there's all these things. They keep going on about food security and then want to smother farmland in solar panels. There's all these contradictions between how they view the world from a policy perspective and how the world actually works from a like laws of physics way. And it's that tugging and that tension and those contradictions that we can actually start picking at, I think. And you really got to get them there. You can't. The policy angle is very much sort of downstream from power, but the power flows from their ability to command resources. And particularly in the UK, we've spent the last 30 years liquidating our ability to extract resources.
So the key item from an action point of view you've identified here is that we need to be in a position where our network controls capabilities that are going to be necessary for the regime in the future, which will buy us seats at the table. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. So if you come back to some of the comments made off the top, right, we talked about the way the doors are locked inside existing institutions, educational institutions, things like the Law Society, things like the doors at certain large firms within the country. What you're really talking about here is entrepreneurially attacking problems that are foreseeable gaps in the regime's capabilities in the future. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, in some cases, they telegraph this. There's no end of government grants for things they want solved. Actually, particularly in the sort of alternative energy sector, net zero is the big one I've been focusing on, just because one energy is so fundamental to their power, literally, and it's the one that's the hardest one for them to solve, because their ideas just don't work. So they're going to be desperate for the power, and if they want to buy the rope, I'll sell it to them.
Yeah. So I mean, this is an element, right? So an important piece of entrepreneurship is identifying durable niches into which solutions can be inserted. And you rightly point out that this is often pretty clearly telegraphed from government policy where their shortcomings are going to come. Now, different societies around the Anglosphere have different elements of this problem, right? Those of you who remember a stream on localism that I did with Conscious Caracal in South Africa a long time ago will remember his inability to get his head around the fact that in Canada, personal security is just not a problem, right? And so building a private security contractor as a nexus of power it's not viable, because the society still has a degree of order that's unfathomable from a place kind of on the other side of that looking glass. But there are lots of problems that the government of Canada, that the government of the UK have, for which they're looking for solutions, for which there are no solutions within their existing institutions. You identified energy as an issue. Energy is, in my opinion, a bit of a thorny issue from an entrepreneurial perspective, because the government of the UK could wake up tomorrow morning and decide to tap the North Sea a gas field, and it would fundamentally alter the energy landscape in the United Kingdom overnight. Well, I shouldn't say overnight. In rapid succession, as soon as investment could be raised to actually tap the gas fields. But as the number of people with engineering expertise, as the number of people with sort of the hands-on experience to solve some of these problems declines, retaining that expertise and assembling it together into small networks is extremely powerful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've actually said to people, if you go outside, try and become an expert in the sort of 20 miles around where you live, and realize how much opportunity is there for that, because what it does is it plugs you into existing non-political power networks, local councils, community groups, all that sort of good stuff. But it actually means you can tailor the whatever thing you decide to take forward to your little area. So you've got investment in it, but then also maybe your local council will have investment in it, because they're getting pushed from on high to solve these sorts of problems. And if you could come along and help solve it for them, that's going to be mutually beneficial.
Yeah, I think this is an important point, that the formation of local networks here is a really important step. I've talked a lot about the network which exists in kind of the reform community in Canada. which has been extremely effective at exploiting the regime's demand for expanding housing supply in southern Ontario. To give our community its due, we've made a killing across 1 million different small contractors on a housing boom that is entirely artificial. But if the resources are going to go somewhere, they might as well come to us. And I think the same is true across a number of domains. If the resources are going to be expended by the regime, we might as well try to capture as many of them as possible into our local networks. But it comes with this other important caveat, which is, how do you prevent your local network from becoming captive to that, captive to influence from the regime as a consequence of this effort to siphon off?
Yeah, it's always been that's always the game you got to play. Unfortunately, you've just sort of got to keep a watch for it. It's harder as well. Of course, we've got things like the Equalities Act. So if your business gets over a certain size, then you have to diversely employ and report on all these sorts of things. So it does actually work in favor of localism. If you are only operating with an operating window about 20 miles across, you do kind of fly under the radar for those things. They're not, because they can't audit everybody. And if you're just doing something positive, they'll probably leave you alone.
This is another really important point. People look at something like the Equalities Act. There are equivalents in almost every jurisdiction, but all of these structures are targeted at companies above size thresholds. In the US, the size threshold is 50 employees. I think in Canada, it's 100 employees, below which you're not subject to scrutiny for many of these items. There's a lot you can do with 49 high competence people, especially if you're focused on a specific problem in a specific place, and especially if you're part of an informal network which spans many organizations of that size. So an important part of what needs to be done here to overcome policy like the Equalities Act is to be able to have these reliable, informal bonds of mutual loyalty. And so like religious community networks are pretty effective at this, but there are a whole collection of other social institutions that I think are really important in building that kind of that kind of set of networks. So one of the things that you've taken up in the UK that I think is quite fascinating is leadership in the STEAM community. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So the STEAM sort of circuit in this country is fascinating. It's quite unique, actually. There's about, I think it's 2,000 STEAM road vehicles, and there's about 150 independent railway companies operating various lines. Some of them, like the West Somerset line's over 26 miles long, I think it is. So it's a major concern. And they have their own works where they can repair their own engines. They're filling the order books of people like Sheffield's Forstmasters to keep the steel industry just about going. They do employ quite a number of people. It's about £750 million a year across the sector in gross revenue, but they've all got apprenticeship programs to teach the sort of hard STEM skills, and offering things like boiler smithing, machining in hard and soft metals, woodwork and carpentry for the carriages. There's architecture and all the buildings and the permanent way. So this comes back to my idea of capabilities and competency. This is a little network, and it's been infected in various places, but everything does eventually. But they are fundamentally people who can get stuff done and lift big lumps of metal about. And
well, the other thing
actually
that I think is interesting about it particularly is the way that, like, if you look at the things if you look at the Steam fairs, for example, they're an intersection between competence and an expression of uniquely British culture, and very recognizably British culture. And I think it's an interesting model to build on, where you have people tend to think about culture as if it's ornamental, but culture that is living and breathing is functional as well as ornamental, right? And so if you can create these institutions that have real utility, that are paired with these kind of deeply identifiable cultural characteristics, you create networks which are very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll also create networks which, not through explicit policy, but just through their culture, don't appeal to the wrong sort of person.
Yep.
You know, if you are insufferably twee about things, on this side it would be, you have Morris dancing, and if you're in Wales you'll have a male voice choir, and you will play cricket on a Sunday. That won't appeal to people you don't really want there anyway.
Yeah, and Steam is interesting because the utility is kind of right out there in the face. But one of the things that I've always thought is understood, flies under the radar when talking about localism, is the kind of social utility of these networks. So, for example, in Canada, hundreds of millions of dollars are made by dating sites. There's no way that we can't compete with that, that we can't outcompete that world just by the power of social networks, right? And by that I mean like actual social networks rather than online social networks. And there's all these different elements of utility that our regime has attempted to kind of digitize and monetize, that I think there's opportunities to recapture into the local network, whether it's employment networking, whether it's like relationship networking, whether it's sourcing. So like one of the huge problems in my industry is finding people like subcontractors who can reliably deliver and have similar standards of doing business that you would recognize, rather than people underestimate the extent to which having to have a real contract that's enforceable is a cost that's imposed on your industry. Whereas if you have somebody who you can work on a handshake with, you can just do business with a much, much lower level of intermediate cost. So, I mean, all that I think is kind of interesting. The other thing I wanted you maybe to comment on is what's your experience been like in terms of leveraging either entrepreneurial efforts or some of the existing networks that you've been plugged into, in order to kind of circumvent this hard lock on power that is held by regime client groups in the large institutions.
Funnily enough, through the steam engines, I mean, our local town does actually do a civic service once a year, in the church, where we all gather and sing a few hymns, and the mayor does the parable of the Good Samaritan. And there's also the civic ball, where the mayor invites all the sort of great and the good of the town to come and have a 3-course meal and a bit of a knees up. These events are then, not only does the town council go, but the mayors of local towns and cities around come, the local MP comes, the press. I've got quite a good working relationship with the local paper. You gain a reputation with these people for being polite, professional, delivering, even if it's very simple things like the town does quite a lot of little social events and food festivals and all the rest of it. And if they ask for an engine, we're there. Gaining a reputation is your credentials of being reliable and active and engaged. Does you the world of good, actually. And we've had quite a bit of money back out of the town for their, they get a budget for community projects and what have you, and we're pretty reliably getting pots of money out of that. So that's a very good thing. It also means I know who to talk to. So when I had the idea for the gasworks, which is slowly being chipped away on the few minutes I have spare each month, I sent an email to one of my friends in the town council, instantly put me through to the correct person. I was having coffee with them within a week, and there was no pushback or anything. In fact, they were enormously, excited by the prospect of such things. So working with them like that, I'm sure you've seen, if you get a decent reputation of being a good egg, a lot of those policy barriers, they can't be removed, but they can be lessened. Certainly, I mean, one of the banes of the existence in the UK is planning law, planning permission, and if you've got a bad reputation, it can essentially be gummed up indefinitely. So you've got to keep the local council on side. But again, it comes back to something I've said to a lot of people as well, which is, if you're building these networks, simply for the benefit of your local community. It's not, you mustn't make it an expressly political thing. I'm sure you've seen that.
Well, I think this is an important point. Our mutual friend, Academic Agent, has taken to calling himself a center leftist. And, there's a whole discussion to be had about that. But one of the valuable lessons out of that is the disutility of framing yourself within political terms which are understood by the regime. Yeah. Right. So the formation of local networks of people who care about the future of our nation, our community, if you frame them outside the political language of the existing government, are much more difficult to it's much easier to interface with the existing elite on that basis in order to develop something that will kind of give you a future, because the battles that we're interested in having are not they're not left-right battles in the traditional sense, right? If I look at the province of Ontario, at a federal level, it's ruled by an extractive liberal government, and at the provincial level, it's ruled by an extractive conservative government. The axis between those two poles is not the axis that I'm particularly interested in. The axis that I'm interested in, certainly in the context of this discussion, is the development of an elite which is bounded to this place and this people, right? And that's not a political axis that the powers that be in this country even recognize. And so there's no need to present yourself in divisive political language in any of that discussion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I joke with somebody that the worst thing you can possibly do is you try and set something up and go, hello, I'm trying to build a counter elite. Yeah. And because you're just, essentially what you're doing is, if politics is pro wrestling, you've essentially just pitch invaded and got up into the ring and said, right, I'm going to take both of you on. And of course, you're just going to get slammed. So you need to be the guy who makes sure that the lights stay on.
Well, if you walk in there and say, I'm going to solve a problem that you have, you solve a problem, you extract power and money in exchange, and that's the way that relationship works.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my town is in an interesting situation, and it's probably by no means unique, but it's the one where the localism there, it's the solution for us. So Tavistock the road network in and out is not brilliant. It's largely actually consigned by geography. You've got the Tamar on one side, and you've got Dartmoor on the other. So Big Ills or also Big Ills. It is growing quite rapidly because it's in the sort of commuter belt of Plymouth. So the traffic is becoming a bit of a nightmare. They've also got a demographic black hole, like many sort of rural towns and villages, where there's a big secondary school. The kids are there until they're 18, can't find any work, so disappear until they're about 40, apparently, where they've got married, had a couple of kids, get homesick, move back.
Yeah.
But invariably they're, commuting into Plymouth or Exeter.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the real problems with the historical structure that a lot of localists have had has been that the networks they've constructed have no place for people 18 to 40 in their local jurisdiction. So they all, the structure they've created forces all their young people to leave and then go through, 10 years of boot camp to become plugged into the urban network of the global American empire. And then like some percentage come back, but whatever percentage it is that come back, it's certainly not 100,
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and again, that was finding this all out, sat in the back of one of our trailers having a chat with the mayor, because I get half an hour's quality time with him, and it's not a formal meeting, so everybody sort of speaks freely. So when you come and say, I want to come into the town, and God willing, if I find some the funding or the internet supports me, what I want to do is I want to make non-tourist based jobs for that 18 to 40 bracket, and then ultimately I want to use that. I want to put the railway back in. It's been a bit of a running joke in Tavi that they've wanted the railway back pretty much since they pulled it up in 1967, I think it was.
Yep.
In fact, there's a Dick Strawbridge program on YouTube that was made in, I think it looks like it was made in about 2004, and they're putting one of the housing estates in, and they went, oh yes, part of the planning permission of that is that we're going to put the railway back, and of course it hasn't happened, and they've built another 1,000 homes or so after that. So, and yeah, there is a campaign, and it got perilously close with the last Conservative government when they scrapped the northern extension of HS2. The Tavi Rail into Plymouth was one of the proposed reopenings that we're going to use with the funds, but then of course we had the general election, which meant that all those proposals got wiped, and we went back to square one.
Right.
So going back to our history, and Canada is a prime example of it as well. The Anglos always just used to do stuff, and it seems we've lost that. And if on your local level you can just go, right, I'm raising money to do this, I'm not going to wait for the government to find some money somewhere because they're off in London. They're often up the St. Lawrence River. They don't give a stuff about us. We give a stuff about us, and we're going to do our own thing. You will find quite an organic level of support in your area, and it's not party affiliated. It's just people who want jobs and opportunities and better transport links and better housing and all those sorts of things. It's quite a market, and it's going to get wider as the sort of tendrils of the central government start to wither away.
Yeah, so there's two comments I wanted to make here to connect back to the opening dialogue. First, every time you read an article there about how the regime is shutting the doors on young white men, you need to read that article and say, that's opportunity cost for the regime. That's opportunity for me, right? Every young white man who's been shut out unfairly from an institution that they had the competence to lead is a resource that is now available for me to do something productive with, right? Equally, every time you read an article about declining state capacity or the gap between the industrial capability of your nation and the aspirations of your nation's ruling elite, you need to think in terms of, okay, what opportunity does that represent for me to use the resources that the regime has failed to capitalize on and to deliver into that gap, right? And as our nations continue to hurtle towards lack of capacity in a whole variety of areas, those opportunities are going to get larger, and they're going to call forth those of us who are capable of addressing those problems. We can already see some of these problems at the margins. A big issue in Canada has been the rapid and precipitous decline of our educational apparatus. Well, there's never been a better time to operate like a local Christian school or to invest in building out the infrastructure that we already have in the Christian universities we've built. Or maybe you're following this channel and you're not part of that network, and you have some other mechanism of addressing this. Maybe you want to sell into the homeschool community. Every decline in state capacity is an opportunity for our guys to address a problem and create power for our network on the way through. And so, we need to be, instead of looking at these kinds of things as, oh my goodness, what a terrible crime has been committed by the regime against these people that I like, you need to have an alternate perspective held at the same time. Okay, so that's really what I wanted to get out of this discussion. Alex, are there projects you're working on right now that you're interested in getting wider attention? I know you write a little bit, appear on podcasts a little bit. Is there anything you want to kind of draw people's attention to?
Yeah, so on that sort of thing, I've actually got something coming out in the next Lotus Eaters Islander, which will be out on the 5th of January, discussing this sort of thing. So it's actually quite fortuitous that we've had this discussion today. I was talking in there, I've taken the alternative energy as a case study, looking at it in my own sort of world. And again, on the localism thing, it's a great thing on the local is break down a problem into a size where you think you can have a crack at fixing it. Don't try and fix the whole problem because it's just too big. The steam community here in the UK burns 35,000 tons of coal a year. We don't mine any coal in the country, so we have to import it. We were using Russian until that source was chopped. Now we seem to be... Yes. We shut the Welsh coals and went, that's okay, we'll import coal from Russia. And then about 6 weeks later, they invaded the Ukraine. So we seem to have settled onto Polish. It's not ideal. It's a bit smoky. It does produce a lot of heat, though.
The other fundamental problem is it's got to be shipped from Poland. That's expensive.
Got to be shipped from Poland, yeah. So it's not employing British workers and British miners to make and transport it. You go on my Twitter profile at Alex That Steam Guy, and the pinned comment is looking at this sort of building networks. The one I'm really keen to get off the ground first, because it's the simplest actually. In terms of time and resources, is making a coal replacement, a charcoal briquette replacement for that, testing it in my own engines with the Trust. I say my own, the Trust owns them. I just sort of take them out and fix them. That's a couple of tons a year. If it's successful, move it up. So there's compressed carbon fuels, the Patreon there. Our next big milestone, if we get enough support, is we want to buy our own charcoal retort, so we can fell our own logs, make our own charcoal, and then really start getting making those. Then we'll buy a big press. I'm not using a workshop press, and churning out a ton a day instead of about 50 individual bricks. Just for those exact sort of reasons. I think talking about how small can you go. This very much at the moment is a one man band. Me getting black in buckets of coal dust and charcoal dust, all stuck together with corn flour. So we'll do that. But my sort of forward plan for that, if everybody chucks in £10 a month, is we'll use that as a base of operations, use it to get a bit of real revenue in, and break into bigger things, leading to sort of more complex projects. But also, I want to start having a discussion around supporting other local schemes. What I don't want to do is make one of these plants in one place. I want to sort of build one to make a couple of tons a week and then just franchise it out. So if you're up country and you can do one somewhere else, we can do that. Then obviously all the heads of these various works can get together once a year for a nice lunch in a pub and discuss other things that we can be doing. But go and read that and support me if you can. But no, that's it really at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who has been 0 to 1 with 3 different businesses, it's the thing that you have to do is you there's a time for studying a problem, and then there's a time for knowing that you're not going to make money, knowing that you're not going to succeed in the first 10 minutes. Just getting off your butt and trying to address a real problem that exists, and building a business plan after you've had an opportunity to kind of pioneer what a solution is, and being entirely comfortable with the prospect that maybe you attempt to pioneer a solution and it ends up being a waste of 2 months. Well, it's 2 months that you could have been building your Twitter profile, so it's a terrible loss, right?
Yeah, I know that's I've done my time in the public sector, and the public sector have a very different way of thinking about things. Essentially, what they do is they say, right, I've got a certain number of jobs, and that's going to take me a certain number of man hours. I get this much money from the government, so divide that up into how many people at various layers, which means I get this number of man hours I can actually pay for. And then, you divide the two and that works out how long it's going to take you to do the job. And I think on the localism side, it's very much the same. If we all put one Saturday a month in or something, then you can achieve a little. But if people start going full time with it, suddenly you're committing 1,000 hours a year to a problem. That's a step change in the capability and what you can do. And taking sensible centrist localism professional is I think would be the next really great step for us, because it's one of the things I want to talk about in the new year. It was one of the reasons I'm doing the project, to be honest, but it's also in the new year will be my big push. Will be that we need to stop responding to headlines and really need to start making them ourselves. What I'd love to do is be supported running these projects, and then sort of every 6 months or so coming on somebody's podcast somewhere, and instead of reacting to that day's headlines, go, actually, in the last 6 months I've managed to do this and this. And then getting more funding, and then you go sort of, well, in the next year we can probably do this, and then all of a sudden you start to actually build a sort of self-sustaining ecosystem, rather than just a bunch of reply guys on Twitter.
All right, well, thanks so much for your time. I'm sure our listeners will appreciate it. Maybe some of our guys will throw you a few bucks to continue your project. But the point of this discussion is to draw attention to ways of thinking about the future for our own people in our own space. So thanks, Alex, for your time, and best of luck in Tavistock.
Thank you very much. No, it's been really really enjoyable.
Canada originally was put together by two groups of people who didn't have much in common but didn't want to be American.
The line just popped into my head. A bunch of the boys was a-whooping it up. And there I got my start.
We have had a flag. Flags can be changed. But flags cannot be imposed, the sacred symbols of a people's hopes and aspirations, by the simple, capricious, personal choice of a Prime Minister of Canada.
I have watched this country for half of my life from abroad, and we have turned complacency into just that, a national sport.
I am resolutely opposed to all innovation, all change, but I am determined to understand what's happening. I don't choose just to sit and let the juggernaut roll over me.